Hello class, this is Firefighter Safety and Survival, Chapter 11, Establishing Response Standards. This chapter discusses standards developing organizations and their impact on safety, the role of terminology and writing style in policies and procedures, the differences between standard operating procedures and standard operating guidelines, the levels of policies and procedures, and the implementation of the standards. The objectives we're going to cover in this chapter are as follows. We will define a standards developing organization, or SDO, and how it can affect safety. Explain the importance of terminology in policies and procedures, and differentiate between standard operating procedures, SOPs, and standard operating guidelines, SOGs. Continuing with our objectives, we will list the 7 components of an effective procedure or guideline, explain the differences among the 3 series of procedures, discuss the assembling, modeling, and adoption of procedures, and explain how safety would be improved with national standards. The first 10 chapters of this book have established a broad base of ideas using the 16 initiatives that when utilized can allow us to do our job effectively and with an increased level of safety. Through the implementation of initiatives 3 and 9, the next logical step involves establishing standard procedures and procedures that draw upon the experience we've gained in an effort to make the next incident safer. Initiative 11 encourages similar organizations to adopt policies and procedures similar to their own. Generic risk management situations and knowledge learned from investigations and near-miss situations can be strategically placed in policies and procedures that can be utilized by numerous emergency agencies, making our standard responses easier and safer. It would be impossible to create standard policies and procedures within every emergency response organization for every conceivable situation. However, it's just as impractical to suggest that no policies and procedures could be adapted to organizations. Before we get into the benefits and application of standards, it's important to explain the different terms we use and the intention of each. There have been many discussions about the legal ramifications of maintaining standard operating procedures, SOPs, versus standard operating guidelines, SOGs, and then deviating from them on scene. Specific words are chosen intended to have specific meaning. Potential problems in the terminology chosen for standard policies must be eliminated while maintaining its original intent. As far as policies and procedures go, many organizations have mission statements that describe what they do. Policies are specific clarifications and extensions of the mission statement that illustrate the beliefs of the organization. Policies explain why something is done, while procedures describe how it is to be done. Many times the word policy makes people think of an order that results in discipline when it's not followed. Here we will define the word as, quote, a broad goal or a statement that guides action, unquote. By creating a new policy, the department commits to ensuring that the task will be completed every time the situation arises. Once the policy is in place, the next step is to develop the procedure to be certain that it is adhered to consistently. Some departments achieve this step by adding the test to an incident checklist or an incident action plan, IAP. Many departments develop a formal SOP or SOG to address the policy. With standard operating procedures and guidelines, SOPs and SOGs are the accepted way to ensure consistency, effectiveness, and professionalism in an emergency response organization. Uses for SOPs and SOGs. They're used to dictate what equipment responds on what type of calls and what duties are required of the crews. Used as a training tool to teach new members what is expected for given situations, and used to ensure that specific command procedures are followed. They're also used to ensure that important safety measures are followed and used to prevent departmental losses or personal injuries. Both SOPs and SOGs use the common terms standard and operating. The word standard does allow for some deviation for unusual circumstances. The term operating is understood as a process or action of work that is rarely disputed. The issue of procedure versus guideline is much more controversial. Because the word procedure can be detained as a course of action, it could be interpreted as mandatory. Some feel that guidelines are more easily deviated from than procedures, which could reduce the legal implications of not following the standard. Regardless of whether your department uses SOPs or SOGs, they have to be written in a way that addresses the most possible scenarios. A good rule of thumb is to use strong words such as procedure, shall, and must when safety is involved, and use guideline, should, and may for recommended guidelines. NFPA references procedures in most of its standards, whereas the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, references both procedures and guidelines. If we're going to use the word standard in our policies, procedures, and guidelines, we should make sure they are standard. This is not only to ensure that we are doing the right thing, but it also reduces our liability because we're following a standard. When it comes to writing style, SOPs and SOGs must be written using common terminology with a common writing style or format. Stephen B. Page, author of Enlisting a System of Policies and Procedures, urges writers to use 7 specific headings in an effort to maintain consistency. The purpose is the first component should be the purpose, which is clearly stated in 1 or 2 sentences. It should leave no questions about the intent of the SOP and should give a hint of what is to follow in the rest of the document. Revision history. It's not uncommon for SOPs and SOGs to undergo changes over time, and tracking the history of revisions is an important component. A complete index should be distributed with each revision that contains the latest revision number or date for each SOP. As far as personnel being affected, this section lists which specific personnel or ranks are involved in acting on the SOP. When it comes to policy, the policy section explains the rationale behind the SOP or why it was written. Some fire departments use the word purpose rather than policy for this section. The advantage of having a definition section in the SOP is to ensure consistency in application. With responsibilities, the responsibilities section is intended to explain who is responsible for acting on the SOP and what specific action he or she should take. With procedures, the final component of the SOP should demonstrate the steps necessary to achieve the goal of the policy and expand on the responsibilities. In order to provide standard policies for emergency response agencies, the first step would be to create a system based on the different levels of applicability. Series 1 or S1 policies and procedures would be applicable to virtually all emergency response agencies with little or no alterations. Series 2 or S2 would act as a template for the majority of agencies. Series 3 or S3 would be used for specialized planning and responses. Series 1 or S1 National means that all emergency response organizations have similar risks as a result of specific response duties. Because of these similarities, common industry-wide standards for procedures can be applicable with few local changes. Some examples of these commonalities include emergency response, apparatus positioning, using the command system, and risk management. With emergency response, one of the core objectives of Initiative 11 is to develop standards for emergency response. Before standards can be developed, it's important to define what an emergency is. Most emergency responders would agree that the reason determining what is an emergency versus a non-emergency is due to liability. National standards could improve safety based on the type of call, apparatus, and personnel responding. The way an emergency call is reported and dispatched affects response. Calls such as building fires, heart attacks, and trench rescues are usually presumed to be emergencies based on the dispatcher matching the caller's information to a predetermined response procedure. Service calls for animal rescues, water leaks, and other investigations or complaints generally are regarded as non-emergency responses. Sometimes additional information categorizes a call to an emergency or non-emergency response. Some specific types of calls could benefit from a national standard for response, including automatic alarms, odor and smoke investigations, EMS assists, ambulance transports. Aside from the type of call, the apparatus responding to an incident affects the overall risk. This has to do with not only the type of apparatus, but also the condition of the vehicle. Rules vary from state to state regarding apparatus safety inspections, with many having no requirements at all. Two types of apparatus specifically are worth mentioning and should have their own procedures. Water tenders or tankers are one of the most prevalent vehicles for firefighter injuries and death. Personally owned vehicles, POVs. Most POVs are not equipped with the same caliber of emergency warning devices such as emergency apparatus, and two-way radio is uncommon. The condition of the vehicle is also an issue. The final component of emergency response procedures relates to the personnel who are responding. The primary cause in most NEOSH reports of apparatus and POV crashes is operator error, often due to high rate of speed or leaving the roadway and overcompensating. Now let's talk about apparatus position. Once an emergency vehicle has arrived on scene, proper position for safety is essential. S1 procedures for positioning would deal primarily with proximity dangers, scene protection. When parking an emergency vehicle, a strategic position may also be a dangerous position. Responders from home have an equal responsibility for placement of their vehicles. With the introduction of high visibility vests and more emphasis on using emergency vehicles as a protective barrier on roadway incidents, there's been a significant promotion of scene protection. When it comes to command system, most organizations have some sort of policy and procedure for utilizing the incident command system based on scene requirements. Although the National Incident Management System, NIMS, was introduced in 2004, many discussions continue regarding what incidents require its use. NIMS provides standardized organizational structures and requirement for processes, procedures, and systems designed to improve interoperability. Two specific aspects of NIMS are important to note when discussing the concept of national standards for response policies and procedures. The command system and its associated terminology have proven effective on both strategical and tactical levels, as well as on conformance to safety standards. The second advantage of NIMS is that it provides the framework for expansion and interoperability. Any incident that uses a similar command system format early on, whether or not is referred to officially as NIMS, can grow to meet the needs of the incident. This could include EMS, police, government, public utilities, hospitals, and other additional county, state, or federal response teams or other agencies. With risk management, as the incident grows, risk management must be continually reconsidered. An advantage of instituting S1 procedures is that risk-benefit analysis for all levels, strategic, tactical, and task, becomes second nature. When policies and procedures do not build in risk-benefit components, we can set ourselves up for task-oriented actions, or tunnel vision. If those components are built in, we take the human factors out of play. Series 2, or the S2 template, means that the S2 category of standard of procedures would apply to a smaller audience of responders and would act as a template for organization to help develop a proven but applicable procedure. Although most agencies would need a procedure from the S2 series, there would be several base models to choose from. An S2 procedure would begin with Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, requirements, but would also contain the most up-to-date facts about rapid intervention based on research, near misses, and lessons learned around the country. There would be several procedures available utilizing varying numbers of personnel, different response times, and equipment. The procedure can then be tailored to your specific needs. Besides rapid intervention, other procedures that could utilize a base template include PPE, EMS, communications, incident safety officers, and emergency traffic and incident safety officers. With personal protective equipment, or PPE, although PPE is global in its use, particular equipment for specific hazards makes it an S2 procedure. Wildland fire turnout gear, structural fighting ensembles, and airport proximity suits would each have their own template. The procedure could utilize information from the latest NFPA standards, which could be altered based on the applicability to the department, such as equipment that you have. The type of a system would be effective not only in providing an SOP template for S2 procedures, but also for updating information on changes to the standard in a formalized and expedient manner. Example, email alerts to S2 proximity suit inspection procedure, or similar templates could be generated for hazardous materials response, medical or biological contact, or training for weapons of mass destruction. EMS is another aspect of emergency response that would benefit from S2 procedures. EMS is fairly well established in the fire service now, and standard policies should include it. Sometimes law enforcement is dispatched or simply stumbles across a medical emergency in which they give patient care prior to the arrival of trained medical personnel. Procedures could be outlined on what their duties would or could be. Whatever your situation, a choice of 6 to 8 templates would cover the majority of systems in place in the country, allowing your organization to ensure that interagency cooperation is maintained and patient care is optimal. Lessons learned from NIOSH reports related to communications should be incorporated into standards that can be used to make our jobs safer. Possibly the strongest argument for safety communications procedures is the way emergency services continue to assist one another. It's not uncommon for automatic aid, mutual aid, and even regional response to occur for natural disasters or terrorist attacks. When hundreds of agencies are brought together at one emergency scene and need to communicate with each other, they need to speak the same language. For example, the military has common standards, allowing any unit of any branch to seamlessly communicate with the other. Now we're going to talk about incident safety officers. Many departments have a policy for appointing an incident safety officer, or ISO, at all structural fires, but NIOSH reports continue to show that we can improve in this area. It might not be feasible to create an S1 procedure for the appointment of an ISO, but an S2 procedure would be beneficial and would provide vital information from OSHA and NFPA. The base procedure would contain information from NFPA Standard 1561, which is the standard on emergency services incident management system, including when an ISO and assistant safety officer are appointed. The authority of the ISO and responsibility of the ISO are very important. Emergency traffic and maydays. Another example of a template that needs to be developed is a standard procedure for emergency traffic and maydays. The first step is to establish standard definitions for different types of emergencies. The standard can then describe the functions that need to be completed by everyone on scene. Once that's accomplished, S2 procedures can be adaptable to all applications and departments. Series 3 or S3 specialized. These are certain specialized SOPs that not only your department might need. They might have to do with terrain or severe weather, high security locations, and high tourism locations. A stock of specialized S3 procedures would be invaluable for a department that needed one and would preload safety at its inception. Some examples include specialized operations teams, officer promotions, special events, specialized operation teams, hazardous materials response, high-angle rope rescue, water rescue, and urban search and rescue teams all have unique standard procedures. Although each team is unique, similar teams throughout the country could see an increase in safety by sharing information. S3 procedures would allow specialized teams such as fire brigades to research and share SOPs, making it easier to adopt new procedures and reconsider existing ones. When it comes to officer promotions, one of the most extensive arrays of procedures in the fire service is officer promotions. Sample procedures could be developed for different rules and regulations and could incorporate more safe practices into the promotion design. An interview or testing policy that includes the following questions might be beneficial on a national level. Question 1. Questions about cultural beliefs with safety questions. Question 2. Scenarios that involve risk management decisions. Question 3. Specific plans and goals to improve safety in the organization. There is no shortage of simple policies, SOPs, and SOGs to assemble. The problem is we have no clearinghouse for SOPs and SOGs, and even if we did, we have no way to pick the best or the safest. So policy collaboration comes in. Suppose the fire service decided that SOPs and SOGs should be standardized. We might first look at the way that other collaboration is succeeding in fire and emergency services. Two specific organizations have worked independently for their own causes, but are now working towards collaboration. Fire and Emergency Services Higher Education, or FESHE, Training Resources and Data Exchange, known as TRADE, and together they have assembled their common goals, modeled them into a format that complements each other, and are currently adopting standards that incorporate each into a matrix of professional development. By following these 3 steps, standards could be developed. When it comes to assembling, many websites already have banks of policies, procedures, and guidelines available, and they could be reassembled into one location with some effort. Most of the websites that have SOPs and SOGs promote firefighter safety, but placing them at one neutral location such as NFPA, Everyone Goes Home, or the Firefighter Near Miss reporting system would help with that goal. Once assembled, the SOPs and SOGs would be categorized into S1, S2, or S3, and then grouped by subject. When it comes to modeling, after the policies were arranged, duplicates would be eliminated and they could be ranked or commented on in an effort to work towards a model standard. Another solution would be to create an SDO assigned to the task of sculpting model procedures. Any finished procedures should be attainable by all organizations that need to have them. Applicable standards to reference, such as NFPA and OSHA, would be researched and incorporated. Modeling should also look to the standards that pertain to specific emergency types. Adoption. Although national standards for the majority of procedures would solve numerous safety problems, there would be a heated debate about why everyone should have to follow them and by what authority they could be enforced. National standards would be most effective if compliance was mandatory, but that would take national law. It's much more likely that individual states or authorities having jurisdiction would adopt them or voluntarily comply, much like they might comply with an NFPA standard. Compliance could also be an essential component of the Fire and Life Safety Initiative 16, FLSI 16. Fire and Life Safety Initiative 16, or FLI 16, certification used to obtain grants discussed throughout this book. Eventually, the few states without them could find themselves with increased liability for not following the industry standard. Fire and emergency services have been challenged on 3 different fronts in the past 20 years, all with similar results. Terrorism and the threat of mass destruction have forced us to plan for large-scale events. Budgets have taken a plunge, forcing us to rely on mutual aid and automatic mutual responses. Our desire to improve has created better regional response to natural disasters, such as earthquakes and hurricanes. These challenges have forced us to work together more to maintain firefighter safety and align the way we do our job. The time has come for creating standards, policies, and procedures for many of our functions. To create common SOPs and SOGs, we have to realize that not all of them are interchangeable and that certain policies are easier to apply. By breaking all policies into 3 different series, we can develop procedures for all S1, procedures for most S2, and procedures for some S3. Okay, let's review everything we've gone over in this chapter, and there is a lot in this chapter. So I encourage you to go back and read your text and reference outside materials as well, so you have a full understanding of everything we covered in this chapter. So to summarize, we talked about procedures can be prescribed as courses of action, sometimes including steps on how to proceed. Policies are broad goals or statements that guide actions. Standards developing organizations such as NFPA provide guidance for industries through standards. The term SOP and SOG are used synonymously, but the word procedure is generally stronger than the word guideline. Some organizations believe SOGs provide more leniency for variation on scene, and some believe procedures should be used where safety is concerned. The style in which SOPs or SOGs are written can vary, but should include a purpose, revision history, personnel affected, the policy, definitions, responsibilities, and procedures. We also discussed how creating a national standard for policies and procedures would be necessary to categorize them in 3 different series. S1 policies and procedures would be applicable to virtually all emergency response agencies with little change or alteration. S2 would serve as templates for the majority of agencies, and S3 would be used for specialized planning and responses. Series 1 national standards include emergency room or emergency response, apparatus positioning, utilizing the command system, and risk management. Series 2 templates would consist of PPE, EMS, communication, incident safety officers, and emergency traffic. We talked about how Series 3 policies and procedures would likely include specialized operation teams, officer promotions, and special events. The implementation of standards would consist of 3 steps: assembling the information, modeling them to meet current standards, and adopting them. Okay, class, that concludes Chapter 11. We covered a lot of specific information in this chapter. Please go back and read your text. Remember that this slide presentation is meant to be a supplement to what you learned in your text and outside resources. I hope you found it helpful. Please make sure you can contact your instructor should you have any questions about anything. Thank you again, and we'll see you next class.